Today's book insights comes from Effortless by McKeown with the subheading of Make It Easier to Do What Matters Most. And if the name McKeown rings a bell, then you might have read his previous book called Essentialism. It was and still is a really popular book around productivity and doing what matters most. And so this is his follow-up in terms of how we can do the essential things in an effortless way. So for those of us like myself who work in sport, the effortless nature is something we have the privilege of often witnessing in our athletes. When they are performing at their best, seems effortless to them. But how much do we bring that effortless desire into our own work and try to make things easier rather than harder? Now, he breaks his book down into 3 key parts. Getting your mind into an effortless state. Secondly, effortless action in terms of the work we do. And thirdly, effortless results. But in this video, I'm picking out 5 key insights from the book that stood out to me. So let's have a look at the first insight. So I'm starting with the first chapter in the book, which was called Invert. And he talks about the assumption that if things are going to be great or worthwhile, then they have to be hard. And so he challenges the reader to think, well, what if the opposite was true? Specifically, he says, this time I asked, what if this could be easy? What if all those steps I assumed this task entailed were not in fact required steps at all? So he encourages the reader to think about perhaps an overwhelming project or a large-scale project and reset our thinking by asking, in fact, what if this could be easy? So of course, the next step is to think about what actions we can take to make it seem more easy to us. And one of those is our next insight. So our second insight, I really enjoyed some of the practical recommendations around productivity and your to-do list, which is probably not surprising given the success of Essentialism, his previous book. So the first point that stood out to me in this area was clarifying what done looks like. Now, we all have vague goals, but actually we need to break them down into more specific outcomes of what done means to us. And I think as scientists, researchers, writers especially, tasks can often never feel done. There is always more papers to read, more podcasts to listen to, and particularly with writing, there is more tinkering that can be done. And so if we can actually clarify what done looks like in terms of a paper or a project or just something around the house rather than those vague goals, then that will be much more helpful. And if that is relating to goals and habits as well, then that links to Atomic Habits video, which you can check out in terms of the strategies James Clear gives in terms of habits. And the second strategy I liked in this section was about creating a done for the day list. So I'm sure many of us have these never-ending to-do lists, which literally never end. But actually, if we can break it down and say, okay, for today, what does done look like? What are the 3 or 4 or 1 or 8 things from my never-ending list that actually I want to get done today? And then we know when to close the book. We know when our day is done and when we've achieved what we wanted to achieve. Another one of the effortless actions was just start. Just start somewhere with your projects. Take a step, and actually talks about the minimal viable action. So what is the smallest thing you can do to get the ball rolling on a project? And of course, minimal viable action almost related to me in terms of minimal effective dose that we talk about in sports science with our athletes and training load and weight room load. And we can almost bring that concept into our own productivity with what is the minimal effective dose that I need to do on this work for it to have an impact. And linked to that was this appreciation that it's okay to start with rubbish. In fact, embracing that anytime you start something, it's going to be rubbish, and that's okay. And of course, any business book loves a Pixar story, and this book is no exception. And so he quotes Ed Catmull, the former CEO of Pixar, who says, "We all start out ugly. Every one of Pixar's stories starts out that way." So I think embracing the starting with rubbish idea can make a really big difference to our projects or programming or articles we're writing. And also he talked about this zero draft approach. So when you start off writing or creating a project, it's not even your first draft. It's actually your zero draft, because you're just starting with anything before you then make the changes, shape it, ask for feedback. And as someone who writes myself, I think those are a couple of insights I would definitely take into my own projects. Another insight that combined both Essentialism and Effortless books was the consideration to automate your essential domains. So not just now thinking about work and other projects, but thinking about home, family, and finances, for instance, and taking actions from those areas that are essential. But how much can we automate them? So examples given here were around having a standard shopping list that you add to, setting up lots of reminders or recurrent appointments in your diary, even things like having a set amount of money financially going into a saving account. So just thinking about all those things that are essential that you do week in, week out, or each month, and trying to automate them and make them effortless, that then will free up more time and headspace for these other areas, either of work or leisure. And my final insight is from McKeown's discussion around teams and how our work can become more effortless when we are part of a high leverage team, a team that is making the most of each person's responsibilities and strengths. But of course, in order to do that, we require trust amongst the group. And we've seen this and experienced this, I'm sure, in sports environments, as well as in our own working environments, and even perhaps our personal lives. And one of the practical suggestions that McKeown made was to create a high trust agreement. And so that was to actually specify as a group in these 5 areas: results, roles, rules, resources, and rewards. So within the agreement, the results are agreeing on what results you want, agreeing in terms of roles, who is doing what. For the rules, what minimal viable standards must be kept, and what resources in terms of people, money, or tools are either or both available and needed. And then finally, the rewards. How will progress be firstly evaluated and then rewarded? So my first 4 insights there were focusing on individual steps that you can take to improve the effortless nature of the work or projects that you're doing. But this last insight is focusing on the team around you and the trust and the interactions between you, because obviously those interactions and relationships can directly impact the amount of effort that you have to put in to your work and projects as well. So those are my 5 insights from the book Effortless. Now, if you haven't read Essentialism, I'd certainly recommend reading that first. If you've read Effortless, let me know what you think and whether you pulled out any different insights to those that I selected. I'll be back again soon with more insights from the books that I've been reading. So in the meantime, please subscribe, and you can take a look at my previous book insights videos as well as the insights I share about sports science.